Hello and welcome. We are the Aussie Guys. I'm AJ. G's still on holiday. I'm here in Aussie Guys studio, but I do have a guest joining me for our Vikings preview and a guest we're going to get online. But Ben, hello. How are you?
Good. Yeah, I'm great, AJ. How are you?
Very good, very good. Of course, the commish of our Melb League. I think you are. Is that right?
Kind of joint. You did the technical stuff, and I usually organised everything and get the league going. So, that's been a live draft that we've been doing for a couple of years now, which has been great.
Yeah, it's been really, really cool. So, and obviously an avid Vikings fan.
Yes. For my sins, I guess. You know, there's that thing of, there's Vikings fans and then there's everybody else who enjoys football.
Right.
So, but no, definitely a big Vikings man, and obviously very honoured to be filling in for G as well, trying to, bring the yin to your yang, I guess.
Yeah, lovely.
I'm not going to be G, it's a bit like replacing Tom Brady, right? How the hell do you do that? But we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, I appreciate you being here as a bit of a yin to my yang. That is good, because I have been doing a number of these on my own, and it's good fun having somebody here, as opposed to just sitting here on my own and just calling someone up. But anyway.
Yeah, for sure. Like, if I wasn't here now, I'd feel sorry for you. So
yeah, that's right. So, anyway, we are going to get on the line in just a moment Chris Gates from the Daily Norseman, and I've spoken to him, I think, the last 2 years for our Vikings preview. And the Daily Norseman you can find them at Daily Norseman on Twitter, and they have they've got a number of people that contribute to their blog. I think they've got a podcast associated with them now, and there's a ton of content. Do you read their stuff?
Yeah, I'm a big follower on Twitter, and their insights from training camp recently have been really great.
Fantastic. All right, well, listen, let's get Chris on the line now. Okay, we've got Chris on the line now. A warm welcome, Chris. How are you?
Adrian, my friend, how's it going over there? Things are all right.
Yeah, very, very good, very good. And one of the things that I have noticed, Chris, is the Daily Norseman's got a ton of content. I know you've got a podcast that's associated with you guys now and some more writers, so tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, over the past year or so, we have expanded our family of writers here quite a bit, just because we had so much stuff that we had to cover. We wanted to make sure that everybody got it in as timely a fashion as possible, so there are times when some of us that were the primary writers couldn't always do it and whatnot, so we brought on some more people. And yeah, it's been about a month now since we brought the folks from the Climbing the Pocket podcast network on board. There's 5 or 6 different podcasts associated with them, all hosted by different folks, focusing on different topics. We even have a fantasy football specific podcast as part of the network now. So yeah, we are trying to continue to be the standard bearer for bringing content to Vikings fans everywhere, and that's going to be a big part of that going forward.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, I was having a look. I guess do you read the Daily Norseman, Ben?
Oh, for sure, yeah. And it's particularly over the last week, it's been so exciting to see all the updates from training camp, particularly the camp panels that you want to hear about, and sometimes daily minute by minute action going on the Twitter feed, which is great.
Yeah, and we have an advantage. I mean, I'm personally not close enough to camp to be able to attend myself, but our guy Eric, who you can follow at Eric_J_Thompson on Twitter, he lives about a mile or mile and a half from the Vikings' new facilities there in Egan, so he has been able to make it to camp pretty much every day and report on what he's been seeing. And yeah, we love that sort of thing, and yeah, this is a really great time of year after going for so many months without any real football stuff to talk about.
Once training camps kick in, it's fantastic, isn't it? But we just have that period before training camp is kind of the biggest lull, I think, of the off season. We just have this real zone of nothing, and then everything just like explodes. It's a good time of year.
Oh yeah, because the NFL for the most part has done a really good job of making themselves a year-round sort of thing. I mean, you have the season that runs all the way into February, and then once you hit March, you have free agency, and then once you hit April, you've got the draft to focus on. But once you get in that time period from about the beginning of May to basically the end of July, beginning of August, where we are now, there's really not a lot going on. And yeah, now we get training camp. This is the time for everyone to get excited again, and we're no different from anyone else in that respect.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, listen, let's jump into talking Vikings for. Well, I was going to say for 2019, but actually I want to look at 2018 really quickly before we do that.
If we have to. Only if we have to.
Well, I was going to say to talk about 2018, I'd probably need to touch on 2017. But let's not go too far back. We don't need to have a history lesson, but I think it is important to mention that 2017, that was, I mean, the Vikings were in the NFC Championship game, and the big change of the off-season after the 2018 off-season was the Kirk Cousins signing, and that was, in theory, the thing that was going to put you over the top, but it didn't do that. But we'll talk about maybe why. So the Vikings 8-7-1 last year. What do you think went wrong, and what do you think went right, Chris?
I think the big thing that kind of held the Vikings back is a combination of things on the offensive side of the ball. Primarily, well, I don't want to say primarily. There's two main factors that I could see. The first one was the play of the offensive line. The offensive line was just so bad in 2018. I mean, it's been a weak spot for this team going back 5 or 6 years, but it was kind of mitigated by Case Keenum's ability to avoid rushers and extend plays in 2017, so we didn't notice it as much. But yeah, 2018, the line play was just bad, and I think it was a combination of that and the selection of John DeFilippo as the offensive coordinator just didn't work the way anybody thought it was going to, I don't think, just because he didn't really seem to play to the strengths of the players on the offense. I mean, he knew that the offensive line was not top quality. He didn't really do anything to try to mitigate that in any way. And between that and not being able to consistently run the football as they did in 2017, even without Dalvin Cook that year, it was just a bad combination. The combo of John DeFilippo and bad offensive line play, I think pretty well sunk the Vikings on offense. And they did have a few defensive lapses as well, although the defense was pretty solid for most of the year. I think the big issues were the offensive coordinator and the offensive line, both of which have been either changed or hopefully upgraded going into this year.
Yeah, and a couple of questions on that as well. I mean, Kirk Cousins, it's a tough one because he signed the big contract. There's all the expectation there. I mean, the Vikings are usually the underdog. They're usually the guys that like that fight and know that they've got to step up. But the Cousins signing kind of changed that mentality a little bit. There was more expectation, particularly after the good run, with Keenum in 17. But like you say, I mean, the offensive line, Cousins was 39% pressured. 7% more than any time in his career. I mean, that's huge. And I actually didn't think he had a terrible year. I mean, he was productive, but when it counted, he really struggled. And obviously the offensive line as well. I touch upon the death of Tony Sperano as well, just prior to training camp last year. That must have had a big effect as well.
Oh, I'm certain that it did. I mean, Sperano, not just as an offensive line coach, but as a guy that Mike Zimmer really had a lot of trust in, and just as a stabilizing kind of presence for that offensive line. I don't think his loss can be overstated. I mean, you don't want to use it as an excuse or anything like that, really, but it would be ridiculous to say that it didn't have an effect on the team in some way. And that's something that's been changed this year. They brought in Rick Dennison, former Broncos offensive line coach. He came in with Gary Kubiak, who's a consultant now. And, yeah, hopefully it sounds like they're moving to more of a scheme that accentuates speed and kind of agility and quickness rather than just brute force. And with the offensive linemen the Vikings have, hopefully that will be something that helps to upgrade that unit a bit.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, yeah, I really struggled with DiFilippo last year. I mean, I've never quite been so, I think, angry watching Vikings games sometimes. You know, like it was tough because obviously you knew that the offensive line was going to be an issue. However, you know, Cousins would be dropping back, and he some of his targets, you know, he'd be throwing not even past the line of scrimmage. I mean, it looked like he was, or you know, the scheme itself was already setting him up to fail in some ways.
And it really was. And there's a video that was put out by a guy named Brett Coleman that one of our front page articles from the last day or two is linked to. And he kind of went back and looked at the games that the Vikings lost to teams with winning records. They were 1-6 against teams that had winning records last year, and that was something that Kirk Cousins took a lot of heat for. But Coleman broke down all 7 or all 6 of the losses, I should say. He didn't go into the one victory. But, yeah, of those 6 losses, I mean, he only really was able to put 1 at Kirk Cousins' feet. That was the first loss to Chicago in that primetime game at Soldier Field. For the rest of them, it was a combination of bad offensive line play, bad line calling, you know, bad decisions by receivers and whatnot. It's a really interesting video. It's about 25 minutes worth of stuff, and you know, I saw him comment on Twitter that he was almost traumatized watching Tom Compton and Mike Remmers try to play guard last year because they were just terrible, and I think that that was a big part of what led to that. But yeah, if you get an opportunity, you should see that video because it's really pretty eye opening.
Yeah, thanks. I'll go back into the misery pod for a half an hour or so and relive that experience. I can't wait.
Chris, let's talk about some of the off-season movement, because there's been, well, not a lot. I mean, compared to some teams have done not much, and the Vikings are probably included in that. And I might just lump the draft in because there is sort of so little. So I guess the biggest losses, Latavius Murray leaving in free agency, Sheldon Richardson, both decent losses. Latavius Murray a little bit underrated, really, and certainly did get a lot of playing time with Dalvin Cook's injuries. Andrew Sendejo and George Ialoka, who are just kind of guys, they're just bodies, really, I think, in the defensive backfield. But guys that have come in, and I don't know, the guard Josh Klein, I don't know what he's like. Certainly in the draft, you also picked up Garrett Bradbury, so certainly shoring up the O-line with a couple of picks there. Irv Smith Jr., pretty highly touted tight end. Alexander Madison, so he's your Latavius Murray replacement. Another guard, Drew Samir, and Cameron Smith, a linebacker, amongst other additions, but they're kind of the main ones. But certainly a little bit of attention there to the O-line. How do you feel about all the movement in the off-season, Chris?
I think for the most part, I'm pretty happy with the moves the Vikings made. I mean, I don't think anyone thought they were going to be able to keep Sheldon Richardson. I think he was always kind of viewed as a one-year kind of filling guy, and that's what happened. He moved on to Cleveland. He had a pretty solid season last year. I mean, I don't think he's irreplaceable or anything, but yeah, he's probably the biggest loss the Vikings had this offseason. You mentioned Latavius Murray, who really was a pretty solid back for the Vikings over the last couple of years because Dalvin Cook hasn't been able to stay on the field. And, yeah, Murray has been kind of the goal line hammer sort of back over the past couple of years, and hopefully Madison will be able to step in and fill that role. I'm not terribly familiar with Josh Klein either. I mean, I've read up some of his history. He's had some pretty good years with Tennessee. He did have a bit of a down year last year from all the reports, but he was still better than anything the Vikings were throwing out there at guard last year. So that's good. And I am super excited about Bradbury for a couple of reasons. I mean, we talked about the scheme that the Vikings offensive line is going to be moving to, more of a zone-based agility and quickness type scheme, and he seems to be the perfect fit for that. His addition is going to move Pat Elflein over to the guard spot, where he might actually be better suited, because he was an outstanding guard at Ohio State before he moved over to center there. And that the interior of the offensive line was really the big problem for the Vikings last season, and you could make a pretty solid argument that they upgraded at all three interior line spots, with Elflein replacing Tom Compton at guard, and Josh Klein replacing Mike Remmers at the other guard spot, and Bradbury moving Elflein out from center. So I'm very excited about the new look offensive line, and hopefully, the combination of the addition of talent and the change of the scheme will be what this team needs.
Yeah, I think as well, like, there was a cap problem, I think, as well. You know, it's tough because, they have given Cousins the money. And the other thing that we didn't mention there was actually re-signing of Anthony Barr as well, which, it was kind of a will he, won't he for a lot of the pre-season. And then... he re-signed, and is that a Zimmer thing? Zimmer likes his defensive guys. Obviously, that's where he's built his reputation. Did the O-line maybe deserve a bit more love in that kind of field, or do you think re-signing Barr and shoring up that linebacker duo with Kendricks was the right decision?
I mean, I think they did what they could. I mean, I know Barr hasn't put up huge numbers over the last couple of seasons in terms of sacks or anything, but to listen to people talk about Barr, he's kind of one of the guys that allows the Vikings defense to do what it does. His ability to come in on the blitz, his ability to get outside and take down screen passes and whatnot. If Barr would have stayed committed to the New York Jets rather than deciding to come back and re-sign with the Vikings, they might have had some more money to devote to the offensive line or other spots, but I think it would have made the defense significantly worse to not have him out there, just because he is so athletic, and you're not going to find someone in the draft or free agency elsewhere that's going to be able to play the role on this defense that he does. I think him and Harrison Smith are the two guys that kind of make sure that the rest of the defense can do what they do. I know the front four on defense with Griffin and Joseph and Hunter and whatnot gets a lot of the attention, but I think Anthony Barr and Harrison Smith are the two guys that make it easier for the other 9 guys on the defense to do the sorts of things that Mike Zimmer wants them to do. So I think prioritizing Barr was probably the right decision. There weren't really a whole lot of quality offensive line guys out there anyway. So, I think they handled things the right way, or handled things as well as they could given the cap situation and whatnot.
Let's move into the offense. We'll start on the offense and talk about a few different... We've touched on a few things already, and we'll kind of have already spoken a little bit about Kirk Cousins and his performance last year. We don't really need to revisit that, but I guess what are the expectations and pressures on him this year? I mean, given the contract he signed and what the organisation is expecting from him, do you think it's a little bit of a... Well, I mean, there's a bit of pressure on him, I think, really, in 2019.
Oh, definitely there is. I mean, I think everyone's expecting at the very least a return to the playoffs this year, and it'll be pretty immensely disappointing if they don't get at least back into the postseason party this year. But I mean, statistically, he did a lot of things about as well as he could have, given the amount of pressure that he was under, given, Dalvin Cook once again not being able to stay healthy. given John DeFilippo just being a complete bust as an offensive coordinator. And yeah, I think the pressure is going to be on him this year, and I think he acknowledges that. And with the changes in the offensive scheme, I expect he might not put up the statistical numbers that he did last year, but I think he's going to be a better quarterback, if that makes sense. And I think the offense is going to be better as a result of that.
Yeah, and certainly the weapons that are around Kirk, it's hard to make any excuses for him. He really doesn't have any excuses. So obviously, let's just talk about them, or I might just lump them kind of all in together. We can talk about them in sort of general and more specific terms. But obviously, Kyle Rudolph signed to the big extension. I was excited about the Irv Smith Jr. pick. You've got your heir apparent, and he's got time to develop. He's not going to be put under pressure because you've got Rudolph signed and sealed. Hopefully a healthy Dalvin Cook, but again, you've got Alexander Madison behind him, so, you've got some support. And arguably the best 1-2 punch at receiver, and Adam Thielen apparently absolutely burning it up in training camp. So Diggs and Thielen. So, I mean, that whole package in support of Kirk is an impressive one. There's not many quarterbacks in the league that can boast that sort of offensive talent.
No, there really aren't. I mean, like you said, I agree that Diggs and Thielen are the best 1-2 wide receiver combo in the league. I'm sure there's arguments that could be made for other duos and whatnot, but I don't think anybody has quite the pedigree or the resume of Diggs and Thielen at this point. It's nice to have Rudolph back, and it's nice to have a guy like Irv Smith, who might have gone a little later in the draft than he should have. He probably could have been a late first, early second round selection, but the Vikings got him in the middle of the second round. And he's the kind of guy, people are always looking for tight ends that can create mismatches and whatnot with the speed. Rudolph has never really been a speed guy. I mean, his hands are as good as anybody's, but he's not a speed down the middle of the field guy. And that's the kind of thing that Smith can fill in with. And, coming from Denver, Kubiak really likes his tight ends on offense, so I think we're going to see more multiple tight end sets this year than we have in the past. We saw a lot of multiple tight end sets with Pat Shurmur in 2017, and they worked pretty successfully for the Vikings, and hopefully we'll see that again this year. But, yeah, the offensive skill position talent is as good as any other team in the league, especially if, and this is something we've been saying all offseason, if Dalvin Cook can stay healthy and stay on the field, because it's just a completely different offense when Dalvin Cook's out there, because with as solid as guys like Latavius Murray have been, Cook just brings something different to the offense than any of the other backs the Vikings have. And, yeah, if he can stay healthy for the entirety of the season, or at least the majority of the season, this offense is going to be significantly better than it was in 2018, and maybe even than it was in 2017, because he missed most of that season as well.
Yeah, I think that's what you were bringing up there in comparison to the 2017 season. It was interesting, just looking at some of the scheme percentages. I think Shurmur with Keenum, that season there were 501 runs against 527 passes, so about 49% run. Kubiak, over his time in his career, is averaging actually a little bit higher in passes than in runs. So, like you say, there is going to be a lot of similarities, I think, to that 2017 offense. And I guess Cousins is the real deciding factor. Do you see us running the ball a hell of a lot more, or do you think they're going to allow Cousins to earn his money, so to speak?
Well, I mean, that's obviously what Zimmer wants to do. Zimmer's an old school guy, and there were numerous press conferences last year where he just came out and said, yeah, I'd like to run the football more. And, they made the changes on the offensive line. They brought in a complimentary back to Dalvin Cook and Alexander Madison. And, they brought in, as you said, a guy like Kubiak, who is known for offenses that are able to run the football. So, I mean, it's not that they were always super successful running the football in that 2017 season, but they were way more committed to it in 2017 than they were in 2018. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I think the Vikings were in the bottom 5 of the league in rushing attempts in 2018, and I'm relatively certain they were in the top 5 in 2017. If they weren't, they were pretty close. So, Mike Zimmer wants to run the football. He wants to see more offensive balance. If they can generate that offensive balance, it's obviously going to give the defense a little more opportunity to rest on the sidelines. I think we're going to see a greater commitment to the run this year. And if the offensive line changes are as successful as I think they're going to be, we're going to see a lot more balance and a much better Minnesota offense in this 2019 season.
Yeah, and I think, we've probably touched on all the guys there that are going to get probably, 80-90% of the targets. I mean, I know they did bring in a couple of guys sort of looking at that third wide receiver spot, I guess, where Laquan Treadwell has been a complete waste of time. I guess, is there anyone there you think can maybe come in and give the Vikings something different? Or do you think it could be someone like Irv Smith even, coming? I know people have been talking about him popping up in the slot or something like that.
I think Irv Smith is going to be a bigger part of the Vikings offense this year just because, as we mentioned, Kubiak and Stefanski do like the multiple tight end sets, and all the reports coming out of camp are that they've been lining Irv Smith up just about everywhere. I mean, they line him up as an inline tight end, they line him up in the slot, they line him up out wide. They can just do so many things with him and the versatility that he brings to the offense, where he could potentially wind up being the third wide receiver sort of by default. Of the actual wide receivers, the name that keeps coming up is Chad Beebe. Actually got a little bit of an opportunity with the Vikings last year. He caught 3 passes in his first game against the Lions, which I believe was a game Stephon Diggs missed due to an injury. I'd have to go back and double check that. But, yeah, he got some opportunities, and then he got hurt. And, everything coming out of camp kind of has him in the lead for being the third wide receiver. We've heard some mention of guys like Jordan Taylor, who Kubiak is familiar with from Denver as well. But Beebe's kind of interesting. He's one of those kind of shifty underneath guys who can take a 5-yard catch and turn it into something larger. And, he would be a decent complement to Diggs and Thielen and would offer some versatility as well because all 3 of those guys can perform out of the slot as opposed to just being out wide all the time. So it would give the Vikings offense some different options and some opportunities for some distinct looks as well.
I was going to sort of ask you about that wide receiver spot. That sounds good, and I can only imagine this might even be the last. This might be the last year that Laquan Treadwell's on the team. If he makes the 53, I suppose he probably does make the 53, but I mean, how disappointing a pick was that? I mean, every team has its disappointing draft picks, but a player like Treadwell who was so highly touted and, his college film was pretty immaculate, and it was only, I guess, the first alarm bells were at the combine, and it's just been steadily downhill, really.
Yeah, I mean, I think he makes the team this year just because I think if they cut him, they take a dead money cap hit of something like $2 million, and I don't, with as tight as they are up against the cap right now, I don't think they can afford to do that, really. So I think he makes the team. I don't know how much he actually does this year, but they already haven't picked up his fifth-year option, so unless he really does have a huge season this year, this is probably going to be the last year for Laquan Treadwell in purple. So, it really has been disappointing. I mean, there were a few wide receivers taken in the first round of that draft in 2016. None of them have really been outstanding. Obviously, Michael Thomas went to the Saints in the second round of that draft. He's been easily the best receiver from that draft class thus far. But, I mean, we've seen disappointing picks from the Vikings before, and thankfully both Diggs and Thielen stepped up their game significantly. Otherwise, things could be pretty bleak at the wide receiver position with Treadwell's lack of development.
Yeah, it takes the sting out of it, for sure. The fact that you've got those guys who... Now, I can't recall the draft capital. So Diggs was a fifth rounder. Thielen was he undrafted?
Yeah, he was undrafted.
Yeah.
He actually showed up at a. He was one of the guys that the Vikings signed from one of their tryout camps.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, literally every other team in the league had an opportunity to bring in Adam Thielen, and nobody did except the Vikings. So, yep.
Yeah, and Spielman at the Vikings has kind of made his name with those, I guess, mid to later round picks. They really seem to have worked out more often than not for him. It has been those kind of higher sort of picks that haven't really worked out, which, you know, it is disappointing, I guess. You want those to hit pretty much, and it hasn't really happened at the Vikings.
Well, I mean, he's had his share of hits and misses in the first couple rounds. I mean, if you go back to, I think it was 2012, he formerly took over as the main general manager. 2012, in the first round, he drafted Matt Khalil and Harrison Smith. Obviously, Smith has worked out okay, and Khalil wound up being a flop. He's had guys in the first round like Sharif Floyd and Teddy Bridgewater. I can't put those on Spielman. I mean, Sharif Floyd's not in the league anymore because some doctor somewhere screwed up a knee surgery, and we all know what happened to Teddy Bridgewater. I mean, those guys were on their way to being solid, productive players before the injuries. But yeah, then you get guys like Treadwell and, you know, some of the other earlier round guys, and he's had his misses. But, you know, like you said, he makes these late round picks, and even his selections and undrafted free agency count for quite a bit. I mean, we see guys like Anthony Harris, who's gone from being undrafted to being on the practice squad to finally being a starter at safety after the Sendejo injury. And yeah, there's examples of guys at other spots as well. So, yeah, just like every other GM, he has his hits, he has his misses, he has his late round success stories, and I think overall he's done a pretty solid job with this team if you look at the roster that this team has managed to compile.
Let's move across to the defense, and I might just frame this up to begin by you know, I mean, we talk about Kirk Cousins, and obviously he's the most visible player on the team, but a lot of the blame, I suppose, in inverted commas, for last year has to go on the defense as well, because we think about the Vikings and you think defense. Like, the 2017 defense was incredible. It was a fantastic defense. They were surrendering 17.4 points per game, and that rose last season to 21.3. So, like, almost a whole 4 points per game difference. And there's a number of reasons that you could put down to that, but then there's other things which are a little bit more intangible. But certainly Everson Griffin, the whole thing with him, you know, his mental health and not being 100%, and certainly wasn't when he was playing, certainly not the player he was in 2017. But what your thoughts on the defense just across the board last year?
I mean, I don't know how much of it was, you know, just the mentality that, you know, maybe they were as good as they think they were and they didn't have to do quite as much. But yeah, they did have plenty of defensive lapses last season. I mean, we saw the game against the Rams where Zimmer and George Edwards just got completely outcoached by Sean McVay, locked into bad matchups and that sort of thing. And yeah, I mean, they had their lapses this last year, and a lot of them came at the worst possible times. Yeah, I think for the most part, we all know that the talent is there on that defense at every level, and they know that the talent is there, and I think they get the sense that the window might be starting to close a little bit. Like we mentioned with the offense, if the offense gets to a point where they hold on to the ball a little bit longer, they give the defense a little more opportunity to rest. I don't see any reason why this defense can't get back to form, particularly, and you mentioned Everson Griffin's issues from last year. From everything that's been coming out of camp so far, his issues are behind him, and he is just destroying people in camp thus far from everything that I've heard and seen online from different reporters. So if he's back to the form he was in 2017, that's going to be a huge difference maker for this team because, I mean, Stephen Weatherly stepped in and played well in Griffin's absence in the few games he got to start, but he's not on the level of Everson Griffin as an athlete, as a pass rusher, anything like that. So, yeah, if Everson Griffin gets back to form, I think we're going to see things that are a lot closer to the defense of 2017 than what we saw last season.
I mean, you've got one of the best defensive ends in the entire league in Daniel Hunter.
Oh man, I love that guy.
He's fantastic.
Just when I love watching the Vikings defense play. I think sometimes obviously more than the offense, which is not your average fan's view. But when he's on the field, like I can't take my eyes off him.
No,
he is just sensational. And he was a 3rd round pick, so amazing value. Know.
There's certainly opportunities to being on the other side to Hunter. And so if you've got those bookends and they're firing on all cylinders, and then in the middle of that line, Linval Joseph, of course, and on the depth chart at the moment, Shamar Stephen, who I don't know a lot about, but, that D-line looks really formidable.
They really do. I mean, yeah, you mentioned Hunter and Griffin. I mean, Hunter is as good a defensive end as anybody in the league right now. And it's still kind of mind-blowing to realize that he's not even 25 years old yet. He'll turn 25, I believe, in October, because he was only 20 years old when the Vikings drafted him. So, yeah, he's developed way more significantly than I think a lot of us could have even hoped for. And, yeah, Linval is one of my favorite players just because he's one of those guys that he does the things that don't get a lot of attention, and he goes out and does his job. He did have the awesome highlight last year where he got the fumble and ran it back 60 some odd yards for a touchdown. And they showed him with the oxygen mask on the sideline. Like, get out of the big man's way. Just let him go. That kind of thing. But they're as good up front as anybody, and a big part of that I think is the coaching ability of Andre Patterson, the Vikings defensive line coach, because he's taken a lot of these guys that are kind of journeyman players, like the Tom Johnsons and the Jaleel Johnsons and Stephen Weatherlys, guys who are late round picks or undrafted free agents or whatever. And when they plug in for guys like Richardson and Joseph and Everson Griffin, the drop off is not that great, which is, given the abilities that Griffin and Joseph have, is pretty incredible to see. So, I mean, they take these guys in the later rounds and, Andre Patterson and Mike Zimmer coach them up, and they wind up being solid contributors. So, having the depth up front is every bit as important as having the big-name stars, and I think the Vikings do that probably as well as anybody in the league.
The other levels of the defense, certainly in the defensive backfield. I mean, if I go to the defensive backfield and come forward, the corners are, what can you say about the corners? And the depth at corner is fantastic. Harrison Smith, the only thing I would say, apart from the fact that he is just one of the best free safeties in the league, is just, maybe he's just getting a little bit older. And then in the middle, Barr and Kendricks in particular. So, from front to back, it's a solid defense. You could see a return to form easily.
Oh yeah, especially I know the one guy who might have been more disappointing than anybody on defense last year is probably Xavier Rhodes. Not necessarily because of his performance on the field all the time, but just because it seemed like once or twice a game we would get the announcers telling us that Xavier Rhodes has limped off to the sidelines with an injury, and he's out for a play or a series or a couple of series or whatever. And we didn't see that really in 2017 as much, and he had an outstanding season. But a bounce back from Xavier Rhodes is definitely not out of the question, and something that would be incredibly beneficial. I am a little more worried about the depth at cornerback, because obviously the top three guys, you've got Rhodes, you've got Trey Waynes, and Mackenzie Alexander, who might be as good a trio as anybody in the league. But once you get past them, I mean, we had the situation with Holton Hill who's now going to miss the first 8 games of the season. Mike Hughes isn't practicing yet. He's on the physically unable to perform list because he's still recovering from the ACL tear that he had last year. So, once you get past those top 3 guys, it's a little bit iffy. And, if Rhodes is going to continue getting hurt, every other series or whatever, that does bring a little bit of worry into things. But hopefully Hughes will be recovered here before too much longer. And like we mentioned with the defensive line, I have confidence in the ability of the Vikings coaching staff to coach up the young guys behind those top 3 corners and make them into contributors relatively quickly.
Yeah, and I guess the same kind of could be said at linebacker with the depth. I mean, Kendricks and Barr we've talked about, and as a duo they're fantastic. But last year the rushing defense was only ranked 15th in the league, and a lot of those problems kind of came in that run stopping middle. I mean, probably Kendricks didn't have as great a year as the year before. Barr, not that kind of guy. And Ben Gedeon, who was the other guy who was in there, was, I guess, okay. But what I sort of noticed and started to see was that he was pretty terrible in coverage, and teams were pretty much audible to expose that when he was on the field, which kind of led to the nickel defense being on the field a bit more as well.
Yeah, once you get past Barr and Kendricks, things are a little iffy. Linebacker. We talked about Barr's athletic ability earlier, and you're not going to find a lot of guys anywhere in the league that are going to be able to step in and replace that. But yeah, I know Gedeon is probably still the 3rd guy at linebacker. But like you said, the Vikings play a lot of nickel, as does most of the league these days, given the way that passing offenses have developed and whatnot. But yeah, we're going to have to see how the linebacker depth chart shakes out. I mean, I don't know if Cameron Smith has a spot in the linebacker rotation. Kentrell Brothers is a guy who's been primarily a special teamer over his career. I don't know if he's got a guaranteed spot. Devontae Downs, who was drafted last year, I think he's been primarily a special teamer to this point as well. So, yeah, once you get past Barr and Kendricks at the linebacker spot, it's going to be interesting to see how those sort of things shake out. And actually, I'm not sure if they're planning on using Jaron Kearse potentially more as a linebacker type roving safety as well. But if something were to happen to Barr or Kendricks, that could be a possibility as well, I would think.
Yeah, and I think even this week, the content on the Daily Norseman suggested that Zimmer's been, I guess, worried that the offense is overpowering the defense in practice this week, and I guess there's still a lot of work to do there in that kind of depth chart juggling, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't know exactly how to interpret that. I mean, obviously, the past few years in camp, the defense has just been way ahead of the offense just because most of this defense has been together for the last 5 or 6 years, basically the entire time that Zimmer has been the coach in Minnesota. So they know the schemes, and I don't know if complacency is a part of that or whatever. But on the other hand, it is kind of encouraging to see the offense stepping up against a defense with the level of talent that the Vikings have. I mean, obviously it's different if you're going full speed and full contact, but with as far as the offense has been behind in the past couple of camps, it is kind of encouraging to see them stepping up here a bit.
Yeah, and I guess, just going on to Zimmer there a little bit, I mean, this is 6th season now with the Vikings, 48, 34-1 record, but 1-2 in the postseason, but, that includes the Minneapolis Miracle and also Blair Walsh and his chipped field goal attempt in Seattle. So, you can't put some of that on him, I guess. I think his contract has been extended, through this season and next season, along with Spielman, and, that's when Kirk Cousins expires as well. So I love the guy. My fantasy team names of, the Zim Reapers are one of them, and a few other things. So, Yeah, what do you think the future holds for him?
I don't think there is a scenario where I see him getting fired after this season, unless something weird happens and the Vikings just go like 3-13 or something like that. If the bottom completely falls out, that's the only scenario under which I could see Zimmer not coming back for 2020. If he doesn't make the playoffs this year, though, I think if he's on the hot seat now, the seat is going to be super hot in 2020, the final year of his contract, if he doesn't make the playoffs this year. And I think he understands and realizes that. I think the team understands and realizes that. The impression that I get from the players is that they love having Zimmer as the coach. And, a lot of Vikings fans love him as well. I think he's one of the better coaches in the league, and hopefully with some of the personnel issues shored up. And it's an odd-numbered year, which in the Mike Zimmer era. Well, no, if you look at it, I mean, 2015 they went 11-5 and won the division, and 2017 they went 13-3 and won the division. And the other 3 years, 2014, 2016, and 2018, they've basically been a 500 team. So I don't know if there's anything to it, but there has been a pattern established, I guess. So we'll have to see if that actually holds true this year. Because if it does, I think we're in for a pretty good season again.
I guess the division as well is something to just quickly touch upon, and the NFC in total. I mean, I was counting the other day. There's at least sort of 10 teams, I would say, that have got a realistic shot of making a run at it. We all know what the Bears did last year. New head coach up in Green Bay can make a big impact there as well. The Lions, well, we can move on those for me. But yeah, wow.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not as high on the Packers as a lot of other folks are. I mean, I'm sure part of that's probably just my personal bias and whatnot.
I was going to say, you're not biased at all, Chris, of course.
No, nothing like that. I mean, I get that they still have Aaron Rodgers, but Aaron Rodgers isn't getting any younger, I think it's going to take a year or two for the Packers to come together a bit, and by that time, Rodgers is even older, and who knows if he's on the same level. The Lions are getting better, but Matt Patricia just doesn't do anything for me as a head coach. I mean, he kind of seemed like kind of a, I don't know what the right word is, but he didn't seem like he had a real solid handle on things last year in Detroit. I mean, they have talent, but it just seems like they continue to find ways to shoot themselves in the foot. Now, obviously, the Bears are the big one this year with what they did last year. But yeah, I mean, they had a lot of things go right last year. They were kind of like the 2017 Vikings. They got a lot of breaks in their direction. They didn't have to deal with a lot of significant injuries last season. And you can't help but feel that they're going to kind of come back to the pack a little bit. So. But yeah, the NFC is loaded. Like you said, I'm just trying to count off the top of my head. There's got to be at least 7 or 8 teams that could make a legitimate claim that they could represent the NFC in the Super Bowl this year. So it's going to be interesting to watch.
Yeah, I'm just looking at it. I just put it up in front of me now so I could just have a look at it, because I think like the NFC North is open. Like honestly. Any one of Chicago, Green Bay, Minnesota could take the division, and like frankly, you really kind of want to, don't you? Because that race for the wild card is going to be absolutely brutal. You've got probably a couple of teams in the South and a couple of teams in the East that are going to be serious contenders for the wild card, and add to that a couple of teams in the North. I mean, I think if anything, it sucks to be a Detroit fan, because the Lions are just, man, they've got almost zero chance, you'd think. Tough division, and then wildcard chances are going to be so tough. You're right. I mean, I think the AFC's come up a lot as well, and I think the NFC, you're right. It's deep, so there's going to be a lot of competition for that wildcard. You want to have 10 wins, probably.
Yeah, I don't think anything less than 10 wins is going to get you in this year, because, no. I mean, just off the top of my head, if you look at the East, I think Philadelphia and Dallas are both legitimate contenders. I don't think Washington or the Giants are going to be anything of significance this year. Over in the West, obviously the Rams, they went to the Super Bowl last year. Seattle is going to be interesting like they always are. I don't know what to make of the 49ers at this point. I mean, they've got a lot of talent, but I don't know if it's going to come together for them or not, so they're kind of iffy. Yeah, from the South, obviously New Orleans, Carolina, and Atlanta could all have a decent shot at things, so that gives us 7 teams right there, and then 3 teams from the North that could potentially make some noise. So that's 10 out of the 16 teams in the NFC that would appear to be legitimate contenders, and there's only the 6 playoff spots, and like you said, if you're not one of those 4 division winners, you're going to be in a pretty serious fight for the entire season just to get one of those last 2 spots.
And just looking at the schedule for the Vikings this year, obviously outside of the divisional matchups, they're at US Bank Stadium against the Falcons to open up, which will be interesting because they're looking to bounce back. They're getting some pieces back on defense, and that receiving core is exciting. We then we go to Green Bay. We've got the Raiders at home, which you'd hope we'd get past at this stage. Then we go to Soldier Field. So I mean, you're probably hoping to win at least 3 of those games, and then October's kind of where you want to kick on. I mean, we've got we're away at the Giants, at home to the Eagles and the Redskins, and we also go to Detroit. So it should be looking pretty good, going into the Week 12 bye. But I mean, the last 2 games stand out to me. Green Bay and Chicago both at home. I mean, that could be a massive climax to the season in the NFC North.
It really could be. I mean, that's what you want, though. I mean, those last couple of games, you want to be at home in front of your people, and the 2 other teams that you would assume are going to be in contention for the division title. Obviously, since the NFL went to the format where all of the Week 17 games are now divisional matchups, and I was joking on one of the Bears podcasts about this. I mean, I think before they make the schedule every year, they basically just write in Chicago at Minnesota. Because it's been like 5 out of the last 6 years that's been the last game of the season for both teams. And, but like you said, if the Bears are going to be the big obstacle in the Vikings' way this year, much like they were last year when they needed just that one victory to get into the playoffs and they couldn't do it, that's the scenario you want. You want them at your place, and giving yourselves the opportunity to get back, hopefully, to the postseason again.
Chris, put a figure on it. What do you think? What's your feel on their potential record in 2019?
I think that this team gets to at least 10 wins. I think they get to 10-6. I'm not 100% sure how they get those wins. It'll probably be a typical Vikings season. They win at least one game they probably shouldn't win, and they lose one game they probably shouldn't lose, because that's just the way this team operates a lot of the time. But I think they get to at least 10-6, and like I said, with the Bears coming back to the pack a little bit, that Week 17 game could be not just for a playoff spot, but for the division title as well, and that would just up the stakes even more than they were last year when the Bears didn't have anything to play for. So, I think this team gets to at least 10-6. I think they get back to the playoffs this year, and once you get into that postseason tournament, you just have to see how everything bounces from there.
One question we've been asking, Chris, at the end of our team previews, just to round everything out, is we've been asking people, let's just fast forward 12 months and imagine we're looking back at the 2019 season. What do you think the headline would be?
I think this is going to be the year that Kirk Cousins answers a lot of questions. I mean, I've seen a lot of quarterback rankings this offseason where Cousins is not probably as highly thought of as I think he should be. And, I don't think we're going to see a lot of that going into the 2020 season. I think given the new scheme, given some upgrades on the offensive line, I think Kirk Cousins is going to silence a lot of doubters, and he might even end up being the quarterback for this team for longer than his current 3-year contract. So I think the headlines are going to be about how the Vikings have finally found themselves a quarterback for the long term. I mean, they've made a couple of attempts in the past, and largely because of injuries, they haven't worked out. But yeah, I think that Cousins is going to silence the doubters and be viewed as the actual long-term answer at quarterback for this team.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's spot on. I mean, I think as well, I would say opinion across the board is that Cousins is going to fail. I think people do think that. I think, like just given his history and those big game kind of performances like you've said in the past, it's going to go that way as well. I agree with you. And if it doesn't, well, we're the Vikings, so we're used to it.
Chris, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on, and I am conscious that we've gone quite a long time, but you're very generous with your time each and every year, and it's always a pleasure chatting to you.
Well, thank you very much, Adrian, and thank you, Ben, for coming along for the ride on this one. And yeah, it's always good talking to you guys. Love talking to the folks down in Australia. I think I mentioned this last year, but I am married to a Aussie.
Yes.
I tried to get her into the NFL, but I haven't been completely successful yet. But yeah, it's I do enjoy talking with you guys, and if we can open things up to folks in Australia a little more, that's outstanding.
Yeah, and I mean, I've mentioned it a couple of times, but at Daily Norseman, and the amount of content, I mean, I have really seriously noticed the difference in the amount of content that you're pumping through there. So you're doing some fantastic work, you and everyone in the Daily Norseman team. And I haven't yet listened to, what is it, what are they? What's your pod again?
Well, they were the Covering the Pocket, or
That's
the Climbing the Pocket network.
Climbing the Pocket, yes.
Yeah, Climbing the Pocket. I don't know where I got Covering the Pocket from.
I did that, sorry.
Yeah, but yeah, the Climbing the Pocket network, they are, if you look for them on iTunes, you can just look under Daily Norseman and you'll find them there.
Perfect.
Most of the podcast posts, we have several ways to subscribe to those, whether it's iTunes or Stitcher or Google Play Music or any of those other outlets. But yeah, if you go to one of those outlets and just search for Daily Norseman, you'll find them. And we're going to have it. I believe the schedule is going to work out so that we have a new podcast for every day of the week during the season.
Wow.
So yeah, it's going to be, if you want Viking stuff, we're going to have it for you.
Oh, that is fantastic.
My levels of productivity at work just dropped about 10%, I think. So.
No, that's the goal, to be honest. I just want everyone to be so busy listening to the Viking stuff that everything pretty much grinds to a halt.
Perfect.
Well, listen, it's football season. That's going to happen anyway, and we've got a whole lot of enjoyment ahead of us, which is fantastic. As with every season, we do the hard yards at the off season, but it's nearly upon us now, which is fantastic.
Yep, just if we can throw all the off-season cliches out there, just keep grinding, keep getting better every day. We're in the best shape of our lives at this point. Yeah. And as we record this, I think we're about 1 week away from the Vikings' first preseason game. I know the actual first preseason game happened yesterday, but the first Vikings preseason game is 1 week from today as we record this. And yeah, I am completely looking forward to it. It's going to be fun to watch.
Yep, as we all are. So, Chris, thank you so much. I'll let you enjoy your, the rest of your Friday. There's not a whole lot left. Your Friday evening. Yep. It's been great to chat.
All righty. Well, thank you, folks. Have a good rest of your weekend.
Thanks, Chris. Cheers.
Thanks, Chris.
Yep. Bye.
Have a good one. See you later.
You too.
Well, it was great talking to Chris.
Yeah, fantastic. Real insight there that all the Vikings fans for this year can, get around and follow during training camp.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's been great having you here too, Ben. Thanks for joining me.
No, it's been great. Yeah, the cave down here is a cave of wonders. So it's been good to check this out and be a part of it. Yeah, so it's been thanks for inviting me along.
All right, well, that was our Vikings preview. Thank you so much once again for joining me. On behalf of Ben and myself here in Aussie Guys Studio. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.